And how did you talk to him? Like by phone? Okay. And did you know what he was going to be doing that night, or where he was going to be staying?
That night I knew he said he was going to be staying at Sylvia's.
Did you know who Sylvia was?
Yes, she's a friend of ours.
Okay. And so as far as you knew, he was going to be staying at a friend's house, Sylvia.
Yes.
And do you recall him saying what the plan was for why they were going to Sylvia's?
Well, Floyd had, made his Minneapolis family here too, and a lot of the people that he was friends with were from other states, and almost everybody had lost their job within that time, and he was feeling kind of lonely and just wanted to hang out with his friends. And so a lot of people that worked at the Salvation Army with him and other people that just stayed there, and they were, just kind of being a family.
And was Sylvia, did she work at the Salvation Army too?
Yes.
So he knew her from there?
Yes.
So that was the last time you talked to him, is the Sunday before his death?
Yes.
You told the jurors earlier that sort of the classic story leading to an opioid addiction, having injuries and prescriptions.
Yes.
Had Mr. Floyd been an active person physically?
Yes, he's very active.
Okay. And what do you mean by that? What types of things did you see him doing?
Well, Floyd liked to work out every day. He lifted weights that are far beyond anything I could lift every single day. He did sit-ups, push-ups, pull-ups, just within his house. If he went out and about, he would go running, biking. He always played sports. He loved playing sports with like neighborhood kids or anybody really that would pick up any type of ball or racket. He would play instantly. So he was always involved in that. He would do anything physical. We went on paddle boating. We'll take walks. But he was the type of person which is to run to the store.
When you were with him, whether either he had been exercising or just hanging out, did you ever complain of shortness of breath or having difficulty breathing?
No.
And did he have did he have sports injuries that he complained of?
Yes.
You mentioned earlier, his neck?
His neck, and it down like from his neck to shoulder blade and down to his lower back. There was 3 main kind of areas.
And despite that, he remained physically active. He would do these activities.
Oh, yes.
And when he did those things, it led to his prescriptions, those injuries that led to his prescriptions for opiates.
The
injuries that he had to his neck.
Oh, yes.
And I think I forgot to ask you, was there a time in 2020 when the two of you took a test for COVID?
Yes.
And did you learn the results? Did he tell you the results of his COVID test?
Yes.
What did
his were positive, mine were negative.
And do you recall when that was?
I believe it was late March.
And so because of that, did he quarantine for a while?
Yes, he was already quarantining, but his roommates also had COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. That's the only questions I have, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Ross.
Good morning, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to hear about your struggles with opioid addiction.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with the jury. I have some follow-up questions about your experiences with Mr. Floyd. Before I get into that, I want to just go through a few things with you. You have been interviewed by law enforcement and prosecutors several times in connection with this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
The first interview that you provided was in May. It was on May 31st of 2020 with an agent from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension named Nathan Adams, as well as an FBI agent named Christopher Langert, correct?
Yes.
And you have you had an opportunity to review a transcript of that interview, that first interview?
Yes.
All right. You were also, then you had a meeting on December 14th with the prosecution team in preparation for this case, right?
December 14th.
December 14th. Would
It
you
could
dispute
be.
me if I told you that?
I believe you.
Okay. Then you also had an interview back in June of 2020 with just the FBI agents and some prosecutors from the federal government, right?
Yes.
And then you met again with prosecutors on February 21st of this year, or 25th, excuse me, of this year.
That sounds right.
And then finally on March 31st, which I believe was just yesterday, right? And you understand, again, that at least the meetings with law enforcement, they were recorded, transcribed, and you've had opportunities to review both of those transcripts.
Yes.
And in fact, I think yesterday when you met with prosecutors, you went through the FBI transcript from that meeting back in June.
Yes, I did.
Okay. So I know that you and Mr. Floyd both struggled with opioid addiction, and I just need to ask some kind of follow-up questions on that and time frames, all right? So when you first met Mr. Floyd, you would agree that throughout the course of your relationship, you and Mr. Floyd both had a struggle with opioid addiction.
Yes.
And there would be periods of time where you would both be using, and there would be periods of time where neither one of you would be using, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And there would be periods of time where one or the other may be using, right? Like you may have been
Yes.
using and he wasn't, or vice versa.
Yes.
All right. And you knew at some point Mr. Floyd had gone through some treatment programs, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I kind of want to just zero in on the time frame from January of 2020 until his death in May. Would that be okay?
Yes.
And I know that this is difficult, and I'm sorry we have to go through this, but so I want to kind of work backwards in a sense
Okay.
in terms of your statements.
Okay.
Well, let me strike that. You testified that there were periods of time where you would get a prescription for, or Mr. Floyd would get a prescription for opiates legally, meaning through a doctor, right?
Yes.
And you'd go to a doctor, you would get a prescription, and you would use those pills, right?
Yes.
And then there were other times where you would buy other people's prescriptions from them, right?
Yes.
And then there were times when those weren't available, and so you would have to buy different types of pills, right? Unknown sources, so to speak.
Yes.
And are you familiar with Maury's Hall?
Yes.
And was Maury's Hall the person that you and Mr. Floyd bought controlled substances from?
We had.
I'm going to show you a photograph. And just to you, you'll be the only one who can see it at this time. It's been previously marked as Defense Exhibit 1006.
Okay.
Can you see that photograph, ma'am?
No.
Just to her.
No.
Oh, sorry, I gotta hit this. Can you see that photograph, ma'am?
Yes.
Is that the person you know to be Maurice Hall?
Yes.
And can you just generally describe what he's wearing?
Red hat, red pants, and a black and white shirt.
And that is up in the upper right-hand corner. Would you agree that that has the date of May 25th, 2020?
Yes.
And that's the person that both you and Mr. Floyd had previously purchased controlled substances from?
Yes.
Now, in the January and February time frame, were you and Mr. Floyd clean and free from using opioids?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. In the January and February of 2020 time frame, did you and Mr. Floyd, were you clean and sober? At that?
January and February?
Yes.
We weren't really talking to each other, so I wasn't around him.
Okay, so you kind of were on the break at that point, right? And then you reconnected sometime in March, right?
Yes.
And was there an incident in March that required Mr. Floyd to be hospitalized?
Yes.
And that was, can you describe for the jury what that incident was?
Which date are you speaking
In March,
of?
when he was hospitalized?
There was we went to the hospital a couple of times in March.
Okay. He was hospitalized for a more extended period of time in March, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, that's the incident I'm talking
Okay.
about. Okay. I understand he went once because he had hurt his hand, like cut his hand on glass or something. And that was a shorter hospital stay?
Yes.
But then there was an extended hospital stay
Yes.
in March. Can you describe for the jury what led up to that hospital stay?
Yes. Floyd, I went to go pick Floyd up from his house that night. I thought I was taking him to work. He wasn't feeling good. His stomach really hurt. He was doubled over in pain. Just wasn't feeling well, and he said he had to go to the hospital. So I took him straight to the hospital. We went to the ER, and they were checking him out in the ER, and it was getting late, and I had to get home to my son, so I left that Friday night.
Did you later learn that that was due to an overdose?
Yes.
Object, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge.
Overruled.
You spent several days with him at the hospital, correct?
Yes.
And did you learn what caused that overdose?
No.
At that time frame, did you learn that Mr. Floyd was taking anything other than opioids?
No.
You did not know that he had taken heroin at that time?
No.
Now, then in March of 2020, you got some pills, right? You remember describing that?
Yes.
And can you describe what those pills were like?
How, like, physically?
Physically.
Well, they look different to me than a normal pill. They seem like they were thicker.
Were they uniform in their size?
They weren't.
Did they have markings on them?
Yes, they did.
And you and Mr. Floyd both had those pills?
Yes,
And did you consume some of those pills?
I did.
Did they have the same effect on you as they did as your other types of opioids you had taken in the past?
No.
What was the effect this time? And what was different?
Usually, a opioid to me is like it's a pain reliever. It's something that is, kind of relaxing, takes your pain away. The pill, that time, it seemed like it was a really strong stimulant. I couldn't sleep all night. I felt very jittery.
You felt what?
Very jittery.
Okay. And so these were pills that were not bought from someone who you knew to have a valid prescription for Percocets.
No.
Were these pills purchased from Mr. Hall?
No.
So when were these pills before or after Mr. Floyd was hospitalized for his overdose?
I don't remember.
But you described when you picked him up that night, so you must have reconnected because you had kind of a little bit of a break,
Yes.
right? Reconnected. When you picked him up that night, he was just in incredible pain, doubled over, right?
Yes.
His stomach hurt very bad.
Yes.
Now, I want to focus our attention on your statement that you gave to the FBI. And again, you've had an opportunity to review that transcript in its entirety, right?
Yes.
And you've had an opportunity to answer questions of that the prosecution had of you regarding that statement as late as of yesterday, right? You and I have never met before, right?
Not that I believe.
And so I've not had an opportunity yet to ask you about some of the information in your statement.
No.
When you met with the FBI, you informed FBI agents that
Going to object to improper form of cross-examination.
Sidebar. We'll wait for him
Thank
to
you.
formulate the question.
Thank you.
Let me back up a little bit. Did you know Mr. Floyd to spend a lot of time with Mr. Maurice Hall?
I wouldn't say a lot of time, but he spent time with him, yes.
Right. And would you agree that that was kind of from time to time that he would spend time with him?
Yes.
And you didn't like that, did you?
Excuse me, I didn't like Maurice very much, no.
Would Mr. Floyd be honest with you when he told you that when he was with him?
I'm going to object to Your Honor's characterization.
I'll respectfully. That is sustained. You don't have to answer that one.
Yeah.
You knew Mr. Floyd would purchase narcotics from Mr. Reese or Maurice Hall?
I don't know that. I speculated that.
Do you recall the FBI agents asking you, did Mr. Floyd purchase controlled substances from Mr. Maurice Hall?
Yes.
And do you recall saying yes?
I did say yes, but I did not see it with
I'm
my
gonna
own
object
eyes.
At this point.
All on the
Okay. Now, the pills that were purchased in March that you described,
Yeah.
did you know that those were purchased from Mr. Hall?
What,
The pills that you described in March of 2020?
no, I didn't know.
But those are the pills that kept you up, you said, all night, right?
Yes.
Did those pills continue to be around from March through May?
I don't know.
Do you recall the FBI asking whether you were getting those same pills from the same source from March to May?
I don't recall that question.
Would it refresh your recollection to review a transcript?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Counsel would be?
Oh, sorry. Bates 45212, page 12. Just kind of read this so you'll hear it down in your head.
From the beginning?
No, just from about here down.
Oh, okay. Honestly, I was in such shock then. I don't even know what I mean by some of the things I said.
There was no question. I'm going to ask the copy stricken.
We'll leave it on.
Did ask a question about that
So,
statement before approaching.
Counsel, sidebar.
So you've now had an opportunity to review that portion of the transcript, right?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that the FBI agents asked you from March to May if you continued to purchase those pills from the same source? Did they ask you that question?
They
Yes.
did.
And you responded, once in a while when we were desperate. Agreed?
That's what it says, yes. I don't recall saying
I'm
that.
going to object as non-responsive.
Okay.
Overruled, no, I don't, you don't remember
Oh, okay. Sorry.
that. Overruled, the answer will stand.
And Mr. Floyd's overdose, that was at the beginning of March of 2020. He was hospitalized March 6th, agreed,
Yes.
of 2020. And he was in the hospital for 10 or 11 days, something like that,
No, 5.
5 days. And when you took him to the hospital, did you notice foam coming from his mouth?
I noticed like some kind of, like, foam building in the corners of his mouth, kind of
Like
dry.
a dry white substance?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Sorry.
Now, pardon?
No problem, we'll just walk through.
All right. Now, you were asked a couple of questions in terms of whether that overdose was caused by heroin. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you said you didn't know.
I didn't.
Do you remember telling the FBI that the overdose was from heroin?
I was speculating.
Do you recall telling the FBI where or whom the source of that heroin was?
Once again, yes, I do remember that, but I was speculating.
And was that Mr. Hall?
No.
Was that Shawanda Hill?
Yes.
Did you know Mr. Floyd to purchase drugs from Miss Hill as well?
No.
Do you recall being asked whether he purchased drugs from Miss Hill previously?
I don't remember that, no.
May I approach the witness to, would it refresh your recollection to review a copy of your transcript?
Yes.
May I approach?
So this is to refresh your memory, there won't be a question before you at this time? So he'll go back and he'll ask a question once he returns.
Where does it say that he was buying drugs from her? That doesn't say buying.
I'm sorry?
It says getting drugs from her.
I'm gonna grab, I need to grab one previous page. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Page, this again is to refresh your memory, so there's not a question before you that you need to answer yet.
None of that says he was buying drugs from her.
Well, let's start with that.
Yeah, I haven't got it. I'll go back to Floyd. Ms. Ross, does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, but none of that said he was buying drugs from her.
You were asked, do you know who the woman was that he would have gotten that from? And your response was Shawanda Hill,
Yes.
right?
I was speculating at the time. I did not know that.
Understood. And you were asked, you said he liked getting drugs from her, and you said, mm-hmm, correct? That's what you
It
said.
says that in the transcript, yes.
Now, those same pills, you ultimately got some of those same pills from March, or similar pills in May of 2020, correct?
We got pills in May that reminded me of the same feeling. I don't know if they were the same pills. I don't know where they came from.
Right, okay. So you had a second experience with those pills, right? Or a similar feeling to those pills,
I had a similar experience, yes.
right? And that was approximately a week before Mr. Floyd's passing.
Yes.
And by similar experience, you do you recall telling the FBI that when you had that, you felt like you were going to die?
I don't remember saying that, but I did see it in the transcript.
And is that how you felt, like you were going to die?
I don't remember feeling that way, no. I didn't recall even saying that.
You and Floyd, Mr. Floyd, excuse me, I'm assuming like most couples had pet names for each other.
Yeah.
And what was his name for you? I mean, what were you saved? Let me strike that. What were you saved in his phone as?
Mama.
Now, approximately a week prior to Mr. Floyd's death, you and Mr. Floyd again purchased pills from Mr. Maurice Hall, correct?
I believe so, I'm not sure.
Do you recall telling the FBI that you bought pills from Mr. Hall 1 week prior to Mr. Floyd's death?
Yes, but I wasn't there. I wasn't there. I didn't see anything happen.
Yesterday, when you met with prosecutors, did you tell them that you were in the car at a hotel
Yes.
when those pills were purchased?
Yes.
And that you were on the phone with Mr. Floyd at that time?
Yes.
And you heard a voice in the background?
Yes.
And that was a voice you recognized to be from Mr. Hall?
I thought so, yeah.
And so between Mr. Floyd's hospitalization through March and the quarantining and all of that, March and April, Mr. Floyd had been clean during that time frame?
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, if you need
No,
a minute.
it's okay.
I'm sorry. I want to just, again, time frame becomes important.
Yes.
After Mr. Floyd was hospitalized in March,
Mm-hmm.
you were quarantining together, spending a lot of time together in March, April, and May, correct?
Yes.
And for the majority of that time, Mr. Floyd was clean, right?
Yes.
And it was your belief that Mr. Floyd started using again about 2 weeks prior to his death, correct?
I noticed a change in his behavior, yes.
That's when you noticed the changes in his behavior. And you described some of those changes in his behavior in that time frame, right?
Yes.
Do you recall telling the FBI that there would be times that he would just be up and bouncing around, and then there would be times that he would be like unintelligible?
I don't recall that, but
Would you disagree if I said that in the transcript? That's in
no,
the
I wouldn't
transcript.
disagree with that.
Were you aware that Mr. Floyd was with Mr. Hall on May 25th of 2020?
Only in the aftermath.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect?
Yes, sir. Hello again, Ms. Ross.
Hi, Mayor.
Just a few follow-up questions for you. And maybe try to go in reverse order, but counsel was asking you about, whether you knew these pills were purchased from Mr. Hall,
Yes.
most recently in May.
Yes.
Talked to you about the hotel incident, and I just wanted you to clarify for the jury. You're not trying to mislead them or anything. What you're saying is you didn't personally see that sale,
No, I didn't. I just want to say what I saw.
Right. But you think that's probably where those pills came?
Yes.
Yeah, you don't dispute that.
No, I don't.
Yeah. You just personally didn't see it.
Exactly.
And incidentally, what did he call his mother? What did he refer to her as?
He called her mama too, but it's just different the way he said it. It's kind of hard to describe.
So if you were to say to somebody, "Mama," that could mean his actual mother.
Yes.
Okay. Just also a name he called you.
Yes.
You were a mother too, right?
Yes.
Still are, I guess.
I
I
am
shouldn't use
always.
past tense. And Mr. Nelson read for you some things you said before, but when he was asking you about the May pills and how they made you feel similar to the March pills.
Yes.
But I wanted you to tell the jury, in your own words today, why you say that they had a similar reaction for you. What was it about it? So in March, you said the pills kept you up all night and were kind of jittery. Yes. Is that the same reaction you
Same
had?
effect. It was a stimulant.
And when you took that pill in March, that seemed different.
Yes.
Obviously, you did not die from it.
No.
And did you see yourself, Mr. Floyd, taking one of those types of pills in March?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Yep. So the pills that we were talking about you obtained in March.
Yes.
That caused you to feel jittery and were different. Did you
Yes.
also see Mr. Floyd taking that kind of pill?
We did not take them together that time.
Did you think that he had some of them for himself?
Yes.
Obviously, he did not die in March.
No.
And the pill that gave you a similar experience in May,
Mm-hmm.
yes?
Yes.
Did he have some of those pills as well?
Yes.
Did he take some of those pills in May?
Yes.
He did not die before May 25th of 2020, correct?
Yes.
When you saw this change in his behavior prior to his death, in those 2 weeks, what did it lead you to think about, based on the 2.5, 3 years you had been with him, about how often he was using during those weeks?
I don't know.
Fair enough. You were asked about your interview with the FBI and asked about statements you made. Did the FBI, as you recall, ever ask you, how did you know those drugs were from Mr. Hall? When you told them that you thought they were from Mr. Hall?
I just told him I thought that.
Yeah. And the pills that we're talking about in May,
Yes.
I can't remember if you told me, did you see Mr. Floyd take any of those pills?
Yes, we took them together that time.
I'm sorry.
We did take them together that time.
And when he took those, obviously he didn't die, right?
No, he did not.
Did you see how they affected him?
He had a lot of energy.
And but he was okay after using them?
Yes, he was playing football, hanging out, eating. Just a normal day.
Incidentally, did he play a lot of basketball?
He played basketball too, but football was his thing.
Okay. That's all I have here.
Anything further?
Thank you.
And if you could make sure you take your
Thank
water
you.
with you? Yeah,
Yes.
if you could take your water, that'd be great. Members of the jury, I think this is a good time for our 20-minute mid-morning break.